Welcome to Presentation Ponder Practice. Because Abel had faith, because he trusted God, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained the testimony that he was righteous. Abel's sacrifice was more appropriate, a more fitting sacrifice. Through his faith, Abel was pleasing to God, and God bore witness that Abel was righteous. This bearing of witness was probably through the scriptures, which we can read now about him and his faith. Approval was shown by God first accepting Abel's gifts. The last part of verse 4 of Hebrews chapter 11 probably means that because the story of Abel's faith is recorded in the scriptures, his example of faith in action still speaks even today. Reflecting on Genesis chapter 5 and verse 24, the author of Hebrews wrote, "By faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death. Because Enoch trusted God, he did not experience death. He was not found because God took him up. Before Enoch was taken up by God, it was witnessed about him that he was pleasing to God." Faith pleases God. Faith in action illustrates what pleases God. Faith rewarded is proof that God is a rewarder of those who seek him. The main evidence of Noah's life is the building of the ark. Genesis chapter 6, verses 13 and 14. Noah's faith led him to heed the warning and build. Noah was warned about things not yet seen. In reverence for God, obedience being implied, Noah prepared an ark for the salvation or deliverance of his household. By means of this, he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. The actions of Noah condemned the world's actions. Noah set himself apart from the rest of the world by his actions based upon his faith. Through Noah's trust of God and Noah's actions, God considered him righteous in a right relationship with God based upon faith and obedience. Another person with convincing evidence is Abraham. Hebrews 11 verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. God called Abraham to leave Haran for an unknown destination, and he went out not knowing where he was going. Abraham obeyed God. By faith, he lived as an alien in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. A play on words occurs here between lived in a foreign land and dwelling in tents. Lived in a foreign land means to stay for a while, to make a temporary home. Dwelling in tents means to take up permanent residence. And so there is the play. The land was a promise given to Abraham and his descendants. Abraham trusted God in leaving his home, traveling to an unknown destination, and living there as a foreigner. Isaac and Jacob were also to receive what God had promised, the land. Abraham was waiting for or expecting the city which has the foundations, illustrating his watching for permanence. The city he was looking forward to had God as the designer and God as the builder. The foundations shows the permanence of the city, showing it is to be a reference to the eternal city. Skipping ahead to verse 12, it is said there about Abraham, "Therefore there was born even of one man, and him as good as dead at that, as the stars of heaven in number and innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore." Genesis chapter 22, verse 17, is quoted after the author of Hebrews noted that Abraham was almost dead at this point. Abraham trusted God a long time before he had many descendants. The number of his descendants is compared then to the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, which we cannot count. Abraham was full of faith in waiting for the promise of many descendants to be fulfilled. Abraham also trusted God when he was tested by the offering of Isaac. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, "In Isaac your descendants shall be called." Because Abraham trusted God, he was prepared to offer his son as a sacrifice to God when God tested Abraham's faith. It was through his son that God promised Abraham many descendants, yet God called upon him to offer that son to him. Verse 19 then is a comment on the story of Isaac. Abraham was willing to offer Isaac, and the author of Hebrews wrote, "Considering that God is able to raise even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type." The term considered suggests reasoning. Abraham thought through what could happen to his son if he were to offer him to God. He concluded, God is able to raise him even from the dead. As a type is literally in a parable, but the term for parable in Greek has a broader meaning than our English word. The term includes meanings of proverbs and other types of figurative language. The point is, based on Abraham's willingness to offer Isaac, Isaac was practically dead. It was as if Abraham already offered his son to God. But God restored Abraham's son to life, and this was a symbol which has its parallel in God and his son, Jesus. Abraham's wife, Sarah, is an example of faith in Hebrews 11, verse 11. By faith, even Sarah herself received ability to conceive, even before the proper time of life, even beyond the proper time of life, since she considered him faithful who had promised. This verse has great textual difficulties, and in translation, it's difficult to determine whether Abraham or Sarah is the actual subject of the sentence. The passage as a whole points to Abraham as the more likely subject. Because Abraham trusted God, together with Sarah, he was able to have a son, even though he was too old to cause his wife to bear him a son. Genesis chapter 18, verses 12 and 13. Sarah was barren, and in her old age, even Sarah herself was not able to bear a child, but received ability to conceive from God. If Abraham is the subject, then he considered him, God, faithful who had promised. Abraham trusted God to keep the promise which he had made. The faith of Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, and Sarah are convincing evidences for people to consider. Abel gave the Lord an acceptable sacrifice or offering. Enoch left the earth without dying. Noah survived the great flood. Abraham inherited a land. Sarah bore a son through a barren womb and began a nation. Abraham believed that God could raise the dead. These are all examples of having faith in God, what one's faith in God will do, and what God does for those who trust Him. Trust God. Listen to the accounts of men and women of faith. Offer to God acceptable worship. Have a relationship with God. Heed His warnings. Go without reservations where God says go. Be patient. Give God the praise and the honor. And as you ponder these things, may God bless you